distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. A very good afternoon to everyone here and also those joining us on Facebook and YouTube. Welcome to Sembang Ilmu Plus Plus, an initiative by the Malay Heritage Foundation. I am Sharil and I'll be your host for today. Well, we have the opportunity to hear ideas and perspective from our generation on how arts and cultural heritage can be an important bridge and social glue to foster deeper understanding and cohesion among Singaporeans. But before that, allow me to treat you with some pantun. Sungguh indah bila dijeling, buat si putera jadi tertawan. Jangan pernah kita berpaling, mari kita teguhkan perpaduan. Malu putera beri senyuman, mengharap si idaman mula menegur. Marilah kita pesan berpesan, kerana perpaduan negara masyhur. Okay, the pantun that I wrote is actually about the community being together, cohesion. Yeah, so I guess that's the most important factor these days. And ladies and gentlemen, please join me to also welcome Dr. Noor Sharil, Chairman, MHF Board of Directors, MHF Board of Directors and other MHF Board of Directors, our partners, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Today's event here at National Library marks another important milestone in MHF efforts to engage and empower our youth and connect them to their cultural heritage. And I'm sure most of us are eager to start this Sembang session. And by the way, the Malay word for Sembang usually refers to more chill, chit-chat session kind of style. And among the youth, especially they will say, Jom Sembang, okay? And while the topics may sound a bit atas, let's remain chill, okay? Relax and enjoy what our speakers have to share. So first up, ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Mr. Jamal Mohammed. Mr. Jamal will share some methods on how MHC grew an audience through nurturing heritage ecosystem and how that audience today has taken on the added roles as volunteers, partners, ambassadors, donors, advisors, and content creators for the center. He is also Senior Manager Programs at National Heritage Board, Malay Heritage Centre, a recipient, if you may, please correct me if I pronounce this wrong, Erasmus Mundus Scholarship in year 2008, the Go Chok Tong Youth Promise Award, and the National Arts Council Overseas Bursary. Jamal strongly believes that Star Wars, listen to this, Star Wars and Star Trek fans should really try to get along. Really a bold statement there, okay? And so once again, a round of applause and let's welcome Mr. Jamal.
Hello. Okay, let me set my timer so I don't go over time. Hi, I'm Jamal. Before I start, I'd just like to say that, I'm still currently, I'm actually the outgoing Senior Manager of Programs at Malay Heritage Centre. My last day is next Tuesday. So what I will be sharing with you is my experience with the centre in the past 11 years, since 2011. I joined Malay Heritage Centre in 2011. And I wanted to share what it means to grow an audience, right? Because when we first took over in 2011, we had a redevelopment. We had to come up with new plans. So it was actually really a blank slate, right? I'll provide the context of what the Malay Heritage Centre is if you're not familiar with it. And then I'll problematize a few things before I go on to how we came about to come up with this strategy. Is this thing on? No, it's not. Okay, now it is. Yeah, okay. So if you go to the Malay Heritage Centre's website, this is what you will find. So it was officially opened by Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong in 2005. The Malay Heritage Centre provides wonderful cultural exposure notice wonderful cultural exposure, okay, not just cultural, it must be wonderful, and learning opportunities for visitors of all ages and interests, okay? So it's a heritage center that is for everybody, right? Everybody, no matter what your experience with heritage is, the center needs to be able to attract you, okay? So situated amidst the Istana Kampung Glam, how many of you have been to the Malay Heritage Center? How many have not? Okay, after this we're going. No, it's closed, yes. Okay, so situated amidst the Istana Kampung Glam, Gedung Kuning and the surrounding Kampung Glam precinct, the center acts as a vital heritage institution for the Malay community in Singapore. Right? So it's vital. Not only is it vital, we're probably the only heritage center for the Malay community. So it's even more vital then. So through its exhibits, programs, and activities, the center hopes to honor the past while providing means for present-day expressions. What does this mean? Right? So, of course, primarily we're a museum. But beyond a museum, we're also a living space. Right? So, cultural practitioners, arts groups, and all that should have a place within the center. I once met a friend who asked me, like, why do we have a Malay museum? Right? Because his perception of a museum is things that are dead. Right? It's gone, it's past. So there are no more Malay people, that's why we have a museum for Malay people. And I thought that was a very problematic thinking around what museums are. I think it's perhaps a very archaic perspective of what museums can be. But it also made me realize, oh, is this how people think of us? Is this how people see it, right? Is that why we have museums? To celebrate things that are gone. But then we have this thing about present-day expressions. So that gave me a bit of hope, right? So my bosses back then in NHB, they saw that there was a need to go back to the past and make it relevant today. Right? How relevant? We have to decide, right? Not we as in Malay Heritage Center, but we as a community, as Singaporeans. Right? So through the Malay Heritage Center is presently under the management of National Heritage Board and in partnership with the Malay Heritage Foundation. I'll pause right here. I'll just give you a bit of, I'll provide a bit of context. MHC actually opened in 2005 under the management of the foundation. At some point, I think it was 2009, discussions with NHB on how they could come together to manage the center more effectively. One of the perhaps limitations of operating the center during the management of the Malay Heritage Foundation was funding. And I'll address this to some degree later. By and large, the museum-going culture in Singapore is still in its infancy. We're babies when it comes to museums, right? So the average Singaporean doesn't plan, okay, this weekend okay, I'm gonna go to the museum. Maybe for some, but it's a very small percentage. And if you zoom in on the Malay community, this number is even smaller. The average Malay person's perception of museum is, it's perhaps not as accessible. My mom never stepped foot into a museum until I started working there and forced her to come. So that was one of the challenges. The other because funding is a challenge, you can't quite operate on a more regular basis. You can't do programs regularly as much as you would want to. So when NHB came on board, that meant that we have state funding, yay. Thank you, government. So this was actually a eureka moment, right? So when NHB came in, it came with expertise for the past. NHB was formed in 1993, so it has this wealth of expertise. There were already professional museum people there, so we could hire, and we could also present content with the available funds. And it also meant that we have access to national collections, right, which we previously didn't have. So what are these exciting, sexy Malay objects that we can put in the museums that previously we didn't have, right? Okay, so this is our mission and vision. So mission, what must do? Develop MHC as a leading heritage institution and a focal point for the community. I'll highlight the community is who? Who is this community? Is it just Malay people? Is it everybody? Right? So we had to problematize this as well. We had to come in and okay, who is the community? What's our primary target audience? What's our secondary target audience, and so on. And the vision, you look in the future what you want MHC to look like. Right? So it's a sustainable destination. Sustainable means I won't run out of money, which is great that we have state funding, so it is sustainable. But it also means that we have to do things continually, We cannot just do ad hoc things and then hope for the best. So there has to be a sustained approach. There has to be a long-term plan. Right? Of historical and cultural significance for visitors and the community. There, the community again. Right? Yeah. So always community. Throw community word like everywhere. But what this community means in the broader sense or in the deeper sense is something that we have to decide as managers of the center. Okay. So what is our role? What do we do? One, custodian of Singapore Malay Heritage. Was scary, yeah. What does it mean to be a custodian? Anybody, throw some words. Custodian means what? Authority, right? We decide, we dictate, we determine, we define. Can I do this? Can my team do this? Is this something that we are equipped to do? And can we do this on our own? Right? Do we have the expertise? We have some, right? I know a few things. I don't know everything, right? Especially not about history. When I joined, I don't consider myself a cultural expert. You know, my background's in theatre and film, so yeah lah. I can introduce Malay theatre and Malay film, but can I show silat? Can I be an expert on textiles? No. So immediately we know this one, we need help lah, to be the custodians. And also it means we're the authority, right? So we must have the trust and respect of the community, right? So that they look at us like, okay, these guys know what they're doing. Honestly, the first few years, people keep scolding us like, you don't know what you're doing. So we needed to gain that trust. Actually, a bunch of retired teachers we met during a focus group discussion told us like, okay, you need to do this, you need to do that. You're all so young. When I joined, I had full head of black hair, so I look much younger than I do now. Yeah. So it meant so much to different people to be the custodian, and it's a huge responsibility. One cikgu actually said, this is a jihad. I said, yeah. Made my heart stop, like, oh, jihad, so scary. What happened? It stopped working. Hello. Next, please. Okay, preserve and promote various aspects of Malay culture. This meant documentation, archiving, recording everything, noting down certain things. Various aspects of Malay culture. How much of Malay culture can we preserve and promote? What have we already lost? What's already gone, right? And what's there, can we capture them ASAP? Educate, of course, we're a museum, we need to educate. No museums in the world do not educate. So, but what does education mean? What kind of content do we produce that educate? Pretty much everything, right? The moment you step into Malay Heritage Center, you must receive information. You must receive some degree of education. And how do we measure this? Do we need to measure this? And to what degree? What entry points? Contribute to nation building and cultural understanding. Of course, everything that is state-funded, especially on the humanities front, right? Anything that is artistic or cultural has to contribute to nation building, because Singapore, we have this anxiety about what our national identity is. We've come so far, 50-something years. Well, I think this anxiety is an ongoing thing because we are, some would say, a migrant society. We're a multicultural society. There are fault lines. And from time to time, you read about it in the newspapers. So how can we use the center to nurture better cultural understanding and to contribute to nation building? Right? So what is it that's shared? And what is it that is unique about our community? And those uniqueness, are they really unique? Or are there certain similar strains across? Placemaking, because we're in Kampung Glam, we have to make Kampung Glam more happening, as if Kampung Glam is not happening enough. It is, right? If you've been to Kampung Glam, you know Kampung Glam is quite happening, right? But back in 2011, perhaps it wasn't as happening as it is today. So there was a need to make Kampung Glam more vibrant, and more vibrant in a more rooted sense, right? There's a lot of Arab and Turkish restaurants there. How many Turks do we have in our population, right? So it's a bit of a conundrum, because we knew that we needed to inject Malay cultural activities there. And our background is Masjid Sultan, our background is Turkish kebab stores and all that. So yeah, there's a bit of a push and pull factor there when it comes to placemaking. So it's another challenge. And when it comes to placemaking, we have to work with Kampung Glam stakeholders. That's given, right? So that's our role. We needed to be all this. And immediately we knew we couldn't do any of this alone. We can't preserve and promote alone, we can't educate alone, and we needed to get help. But who's going to help us, right? So that's the Malay Heritage Center in a nutshell. I'm going to problematize something before I move on further in my presentation. Heritage. What is heritage? This is something that we had to reflect on when we first started. So we needed to ask ourselves what heritage means. What do we mean when we say heritage? Is it culture, traditions, practices, art forms, various art forms? Beliefs, are our beliefs also part of our heritage, our faith, our religion, our history? Is heritage transmittable, non-transmittable, tangible, intangible? Is it alive? Can sites be part of heritage, right? Our neighborhoods, our community spaces. Crafts, our art crafts, songkok making, textile weaving, cuisine, our food. Every time we talk about culture, sure got Malay food, right? Every time sure got ketupat, sure got rendang, right? But can we go deeper? It's old things. Some people say heritage is about old things. Some of those old things are nice, some of those old things are archaic, outdated. It's about identity, roots, our rootedness to this place. It's about knowledge from the past, different modalities of knowledge. It's about memory, and when it comes to memory, it's also about forgetting, and sometimes we're looking at endangered heritage. Forgotten. What have we forgotten? Right? So it's all these things and more. Right? My list is not exhaustive. I just want you all to think about it. Next, Malay. What comes to mind when we see the word Malay? Non-Malay people, I'm looking at you. Right? Sometimes we struggle with this, right? The definition of Malay. Sometimes we say, oh, silat, a form, right? Malay lazy, right? So we deal with this issue still. Oh no, it's stuck again. Ketupat. Baju kurung. Don't wear baju kurung means cannot be Malay. Malay live in kampung or Chai Chi. Piramli, Malay films. Next, Sarong, Hari Raya, our festivities. Every day Hari Raya, if I take a Grab, someone would definitely say Happy New Year to you. Every Hari Raya. Okay, so I knew that, okay, Hari Raya is something I need to bring up because it is not a new year. Malay dance, yeah, sure. Malay food, right, just now we have mentioned it. And stereotypes, we have to deal with certain stereotypes. Right? So, who is a Malay? What is a Malay? Are things we have to grapple with. Is it an ethnicity? Is Malay a race? Is it a cultural identity? Can I be born, can I identify as Malay? Right? If I were to convert, we have this term called Masuk Melayu. You know, you marry a Malay person, you convert to Islam, you Masuk Melayu. Do you have to be Muslim to be a Malay? Is it also a linguistic identity? Is it a language? If I don't speak Malay, can I be Malay? I'm a non-Muslim, non-Malay speaking Malay person. Got not? Have, right? Right? And if it's a community, is it a homogeneous community? A heterogeneous community? It's also a colonial term, right? If we look deeper, Malay is a colonial term. Only 3% of the Nusantara is Malay. So how come everybody is suddenly Malay, right? So, oh no, I have to. Okay, I'll rush through it a bit. 15 minutes, very short. Okay, in Singapore, what does it mean to be Malay? It means you are Malay. You are also orang Laut. Orang Laut also Malay, Jawa also Malay, Bawean also Malay, Bugis also Malay, Bandaris also Malay, Minangkabau, Batak, Indian, also Malay, Chinese also Malay, Arab also Malay, etc. So, who decides? Who decides what a Malay is? Right? Yeah. We're not going to answer this. I'm not going to answer this. I just want you to think about it. So now I'm going to go back to our role and remind us, okay, so we have all these things. We have problematized heritage. We have problematized Malay. So now how? Where do we start? Where do we start planning, right? What kind of programs and activities and initiatives do we send? So we did focus group discussions. We reflected on the past management, where the gaps were. And we reflected on things that were successful models, what existed. Bangsawan. Once upon a time, Bangsawan was the most happening thing anybody could watch in Singapore, right? So Singapore was the hub of Bangsawan. Why was Bangsawan so successful? You had the producers. You have stagehands, people's crews, different expertise. You have musicians who could play all sorts of genres. Performers, not just singers, not just actors, right? But also during the extra turns, sometimes you have circus acts, you have clown acts. So it's quite broad. Writers, you definitely need writers. Builders to build the sets, your props. Composers to write the music. Media, newspaper articles promoting bangsawan shows. Audiences, of course you need audiences, people who would buy ticket to watch it. Who is this audience? You need patronship. If you're not aware, bangsawan's patrons predominantly were Chinese. So the performances would have been in Malay, but the theater owners were Chinese. The patrons were Chinese or even Europeans. You have designers and so on. So this is one. So we noticed that bangsawan was successful because of all this and more. Next is the Malay films back in the 50s and 60s. Why was this successful? We had directors, even from India, we had directors from India coming in with expertise teaching our Malay directors and actors how to do things. Actors, producers, scriptwriters, so on and so forth. I wanted to highlight literati here during the Malay film period, because one of the things we realized during our research is that the guys in producing films had close relationship with the literati. So whatever someone wrote in a book published today, next year it could be on film. So those kind of narratives were being shared across, right? So you have your intelligentsia and ideas being shared amongst. So when we looked at both these examples, what we noticed was like, they both had ecosystems. And then we realized, okay, for the Malay Heritage Center to succeed and to do all the things we needed to do, we needed to have an ecosystem. So that's when we started identifying who our various audience segments were. Visitors, of course, lowest common denominator, every people must come. But visitors across ages, age groups, different interest groups. Donors, we needed people who had objects to come and donate things to us. If they have money, better still. We don't, like I said, we don't have a culture of patronship in Malay arts and culture. So we needed to nurture this, right? Arts groups, the various arts groups, everybody wanted a platform, everybody wanted to perform. But not everybody can perform at the same time. So how do we engage them, who do we engage, and so on? And how do we stop making it such a stereotypical Malay performance, right? Because when you talk to young people, like, I don't want to Malay, I don't want to come. I don't know what that means, but working with various arts groups with different followings, we found, especially people like Nadi Singapura, they had different followings, right? So you have different audience segments who were attracted to come because they wanted to watch the various arts groups. The community, again, who is this community? It's everybody, it's a lot of people. So how do we engage these various community segments? Academics, to ensure that our content is well researched, that our content is accurate and correct, we needed to work with academics. Researchers, new researchers, not necessarily attached to universities. Kampung Glam stakeholders, special interest groups, textile people, silat people, trace collectors, we needed to identify them and engage them. Schools, of course, and the media. Regional partners, we needed to look into Malaysia, Indonesia, and so on, and beyond, actually. So far, we've even engaged partners in Brunei, South Thailand, the Philippines, because they form part of the Malay world as well. Cultural institutions, volunteers, and experts. Descendants. Descendants of, because we inhabit a space that used to be the palace, of course we needed to engage the former descendants of the royal family. URA, SDB, other government organizations that call Kampong Glam home. So all these guys form part of the ecosystem that would feed Malay Heritage Center and help us achieve all those goals. So how to engage all these people? Okay, so how we went about nurturing an ecosystem? Of course, we had to create opportunities for the various key groups to be involved. Neighborhood sketches were one of the first things we initiated. This was something that we put up. It's a monthly performance on Kampong Glam, on Busra Street. So this one, immediately we engage Kampong Glam stakeholders, we engage students, we engage the general public, people smoking shisha, don't want to come to museum. We put culture in front of them, they lan, no choice, have to enjoy it. Malay Culture Fest. Malay Culture Fest is an annual festival, and through Malay Culture Fest, we could engage different arts groups, different levels of expertise, different levels of professionalism, exposure, even school groups, and also regional partners in Malay Culture Fest. Senu Santara was actually a platform where we engaged the sub-ethnic community groups, the Baoyan Society, the Minang Society, and so forth, to create content with us. Because they have the embodied history knowledge in them. So we invited them, they created and crafted their own narratives. And this is actually very successful because you don't go to somewhere without curiosity. You need to be curious about something, right? You need to have some sort of ownership in it. So when we did the Sunan Santasi, what we noticed is suddenly all the Malays in Singapore started identifying as Javanese or Bugis or whatever. When we had the Bugis exhibition, we had the largest number of Bugis people show up. Before that, we didn't know so many Bugis existed. So it's a reflection, right? So once upon a time, I identified as Malay, and then I realized, oh wait, I'm Bugis actually, because I didn't ask my mom enough questions. But now, Malay Heritage Center says there's a Bugis community. So you come, you identify yourself, say, hey, actually go home, ask ma, ask nene, oh yeah, actually I'm Bugis. So this is actually one of the areas where we managed successfully to sort of galvanize the community to come in and contribute. Not just in terms of narratives, but their objects as well. Gain trust of subject matter experts and donors through consultations and collaborations. We did this through special exhibitions and accompanying programs. Public lecture series, every month we have a public lecture. We would invite academics or cultural practitioners to give talks. We don't say we're the experts, but we'll have the experts say what it is. They have done the research on. Identify partners who share our vision and engage them. We have this arts incubation program where we nurture up-and-coming arts groups to create new content and challenge them, because some of the arts groups don't create Malay content per se. Right? Graphic artists, for example, right? Street artists, they would have more alignment with New York than they do with Yogyakarta. So can we make them create artwork that uses Malay motifs and designs? Various platforms that we provide for them, including venue support, co-presentations. One time we did co-presentations because we wanted people to feel welcome at the center. Invite schools to participate in program management and creation. Heritage Hunt, which is a hunt that we do in Kampong Glam with Kampong Glam stakeholders and also ITE. Youth take over. Every 2 years, NTU students take over Malay Heritage Center to conduct this program in Andika Warisan. These are just some examples. There's a lot more that we did to engage various people in the ecosystem. And so in conclusion, for us to have this ecosystem, importance of shared ownership. We need to inform our public that they have an ownership in the center and in the setting of the context of heritage in Singapore. Gain trust through responsibly handling complex matters and meeting promises. This is very important because if we don't meet those promises, people don't want to work with us anymore, so we always have to be on top of things with this one. There's a lot of complexity when it comes to sensitive matters, when it comes to culture especially, so how do we deal with that? Ensure quality of content. Nobody wants to show up for something that is of poor quality, so this is very, very, very important. Allow greater access and opportunities. When we opened up, we realized more people came. People didn't come because they thought the place was not welcoming because of the gates and the design and all that. So we had sort of an open concept designed to the center and also our policies. So more and more people came because they could work with us. And maintain relationships. So this is the last one. Once you have engaged those people, they started working with you, you need to maintain a relationship because, let's face it, there are sensitivities involved when it comes to working in community, a lot of sensitivities. So maintaining relationship with community elders, people with varying degrees of baggages is very, very, very important. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell. That's how we did it. And I think if you have any questions, I'll engage them later. We do questions at the end, is it? No, okay. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jamal. And for those of you who have the answer, who or what is Malay, feel free to comment on the comment section, or maybe later on during the question and answer session, you might want to share your thoughts about it. And up next, we have Ms. Meneka Gopalan. Her presentation attempts to address these questions from the perspective of a person who lived half their life overseas and the other half in Singapore. Donning several hats in their journey as an artist, educator, curator, and now director of Singapore leading and pioneer classical Indian arts organization. Ms. Meneka is multidisciplinary international artist, artistic director, and curator in the visual and performing arts, film, and design. With 16 years of study and work experience in the United States of America, she has pursued her passion for the arts in Singapore's government, museum, culture, heritage, education, and community sectors for the last 7 years. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together for Ms. Meneka Gopalan.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I think if you see my slide here, you might recognize where these posters are from, right? Anyone can take a guess? Do they look familiar to you? Yeah. So these are typical Bollywood posters, right? So when I was younger, the word heritage was completely foreign to me. It didn't mean anything, actually, when I grew up in Singapore. Sorry. All we actually knew growing up was films. That's actually how we understood our culture. That's actually how I identified myself as an Indian, whatever that meant, right? Because when you're growing up in Singapore, nobody actually talks about what being Indian actually is, you know. It's just sort of like, okay, you're Indian and that's it, right? And just like, you know, the Malay community where you have the Bugis, the Javanese, and all sorts of, you know, different denominations and sects, the same thing also happens within the Indian community as well. I discovered that I am part Malayali and part Javanese. I only found out about this after my grandmother passed away, and I found out that she wasn't actually from Singapore. She actually came from Java. My grandfather's from Medan. So how that came about, where they moved, how they moved around, I have no idea. And, you know, I really couldn't care less when I was a kid, right? But all of that kind of changed when I moved to the States. Because when I moved to the States, that's when I realized what being non-white actually meant, what being non-American actually meant, what being Singaporean actually meant, what being Indian actually meant, and I was on that search to discovering what that identity was. Because for me, what I learned over the years is that the so-called heritage that we talk about is actually shaped by the very things that we identify ourselves with. And our identity, in return, is shaped by our heritage. So they both, you know, exist simultaneously in the same space, right? In an abstract way, in a very real way. So my way of dealing with it was, like every typical Indian child, my parents wanted me to be a doctor. So I actually went to medical school, and I realized very, very quickly that my soul was sucked away when I was in a hospital, you know, 24 hours a day as a resident. And then I realized that, like, you know what, this isn't really working out for me. I've got to explore something else. I've got to feed my soul in some way. I've got to really look deep within and figure out who I was, right? Who I am, who my people were. And that's when I turned to the arts. So I've always been very creative since young. And everyone told me, you know, why are you doing the arts? It's just a hobby, right? It's just a thing people do for fun. And being an artist, I just didn't listen to anyone. Okay, I was a rebel in my family. I'm the black sheep in my family, actually. So I just decided, you know what, screw that. I'm just going to pursue whatever it is that I love, whatever it is that fuels my passion in life. And that's what brought me to basically studying arts in the US. So when I was studying art, you know, one of the first things that they ask you to do is to write a description of who you are and what your art is about. And I realized that I couldn't, because I didn't know how to describe myself. And it took me years, and even now, if you ask me to like describe myself, I still have trouble doing that. And I think that's the complexity of the world that we live in, right? How we identify ourselves. So I'm just going to show you a few of my works, and I'll walk you through the journey of what I discovered along the way, right? What you see here are some of my first paintings, where I was trying to actually digest, or not digest, but kind of deconstruct the images that we would usually see of gods and goddesses in the Hindu mythology. So you have Ganesha, the elephant god. You have Saraswati, the god of art, and yet Kali, right? So I started exploring these things. All I wanted to do was to break it down, you know, and I came up with a series of paintings like that. And as I went along, my journey sort of moved on to working with other mediums beyond painting. I tried printmaking, I tried photography, I ventured into film, ventured into printmaking, all sorts of mediums that you can imagine, because for me it was all about discovering, breaking down, putting it back together, breaking down, putting it back together. And that for me has been a lifelong challenge, right? And it still continues to be that way. I'm still discovering things, still learning things along the way. And one of the things that as I was deconstructing sort of my identity, or what you would consider an identity, I started looking at like very typical images of Indian iconography, right? Also typical images of what it meant to be a man in society, what it meant to be a woman in society. So I began deconstructing all these things and sort of like putting questions out there. And being in America, being an outsider, right, looking in, one of the things that I very quickly realized is that I don't look like any of them, right? And not many people do, So then it became a question of, who am I? Where do I belong, right? Where can I fit in, right? And that's what art actually sort of helped along the way. And from making works, I went into curation. Because the beauty of curation is that, firstly, you have to start with conceptualization. You have to identify something that you are interested in pursuing. You have to find people who sort of feed into the vision that you have, that you want to execute. And I found a group of artists who were all dealing with the same issues that I was: identity and the idea of displacement. Now, what happens when you're displaced is that you're constantly in a state of being in the middle. You're in a transitory space. And that, for me, was what liminality was all about, what the ephemeral nature of how we function was all about. And that pretty much sprung forth, for me, the series of works, pretty much till now, where I'm constantly exploring this in-between space. And I think that's where we all sort of exist, and coexist, right? After being in the US for 16 years, I came back to Singapore. And I was thinking to myself, what do I do in Singapore? Because I'd been away for such a long time. I didn't know anyone. And it just so happened that the first job that I applied to, I took it. And that was working at the National Heritage Board with the Indian Heritage Center. So I was there for about 5 years. And the most interesting thing for me was that the Indian Heritage Center had not even been constructed when I first joined. So it was a blank slate. We could do whatever we wanted, how we wanted. I was given full authority. But of course, there were stipulations. There were, similar to Jamal's Malay Heritage Center, we had our vision statement, our mission statement, placemaking, authority figure and all of that. And the same sort of complexities also were there. I mean, you wouldn't believe it, but if you go to the Indian Heritage Center, which is located in Campbell Lane, there's a signboard in the front of the museum. There's one side that's in English, and the other side, which is in Tamil, okay? Now, how we got to even that particular thing was so complex, because firstly, what languages should be up there? Because as we know, the Indian community is very diverse in Singapore. We have Malayalis, we have Gujaratis, we have Telugus, we have Sikhs, so many denominations, right? So many different sorts of cultures. So what language do we choose? Of course, we have to go with the official one. And if it's the official one, do we also include Malay? Do we also include Chinese? How big would this signboard be if we had to do that, right? That was the first problem. Second problem was, which side should face the outside towards Serangoon Road, and which side should face Clive Street, which is the smaller lane? So if you go, the first time we installed it, the Tamil words were facing Campbell Lane. The English words were facing Clive Street. Installed everything. It took days to do this, okay? And days after, Tamil community came. They came to us and they said, why is it facing outside? Why is it facing Campbell Lane? It should be facing towards Little India, which is towards Clive Street, because that's where the heart of Little India is. So we thought, no, never mind, it's okay. Then the other communities came and they said, why is the Tamil facing outside? Nobody will know that this is the Indian Heritage Center because it's only in Tamil, So the English should be facing outside. So we changed it, right? We changed it, and then again the Tamil community came and said, how dare you change it? Why? Why did you listen to everybody else? Why didn't you consult us? We're the reigning community in Singapore, okay? We're the majority. You should listen to us. We take first place, right? So all of these sort of sensitivities were there. But the one thing is that this was a learning experience for me, because I never realized how much people cared. And I think that's what really, really inspired me. the care that they had to preserve their language, to present themselves as a particular community. And I didn't just see this with the Tamil community, I see this across various different communities. And that got me into delving deeper into the history, into the heritage, and into the research of how we all came about, how we all migrated here, how we all set aside. And I was given the opportunity to actually, do some artworks for the museum, where I actually did some installational work with monuments. We were always around Singapore, we're driving around, we don't realize these things, right? We don't pay attention to these things. And it was only after I drew them that I realized, oh, so that's Little India Arcade. That's how it used to be. Or that's the Methodist school, the Tamil Methodist school. The first ever Tamil language school in Singapore was in a kampong hut that has now completely transformed, right? Or that's, the Sindhi Association House, which was one of the first houses given to a particular community, right? These are all things that I learned as I delved deeper into it and explored art along the way, in some way, right? And the thing about museums is that obviously you want people to come to them, right? You want people to come in. And we all know, as Jamal was saying, it's very hard to get people to come into a museum because we're not a museum-going culture at all. There's a lot for us to learn as we go along. But this is where we thought, let's bring the arts out. Let's bring the culture out as much as possible, because there's no way that any publicity that we do out there is going to encourage anyone unless it's in your face, unless it's out in the streets, right? So it's kind of ironic that, arts and culture and heritage is all around us, but you need certain sort of like markers for people to pay attention. So we did outdoor installations, we did outdoor performances. We did, so many different sort of like mural artworks and stuff just to get the community involved, just to get people involved and to get them interested. And when they came to the street, they walked in because they wanted to know more. That was how we engaged with them. That was how we actually sort of managed to, lure people in, seduce them to actually go in and understand. And once they walked in, they were blown away because they had no idea. They had no idea. And that's the amazing thing, right? When you see that wonderment in people's eyes, when you see that happening across different age groups, yeah? And, from the Indian Heritage Center, from the Indian Heritage Center, I started working on outdoor installations because I realized that the way to really communicate about heritage to people was to go outside and to involve the community. So this was a program that we did for Deepavali 1 year. This was actually commissioned by Little India Heritage Shopkeepers Association, Lisha. They wanted me to work with international schools to present some artworks or some variation of themselves, a symbol of themselves, and place it in Little India. So I went to all the international schools in Singapore and basically worked with the students to create their own artwork on elephants. And of course, elephants are very symbolic, right? In the Indian culture, everybody knows that. Elephants, peacocks, the usual sort of stereotype, right? But, the kids loved it. And it actually made them come into Little India, which they never did before. So they got to experience Indian culture in some way. And I realized that the arts were the channel. The arts were the pipeline to making that happen, right? Because you're not bounded by language. You're not bounded by anything, really, with the arts. You can express anything you want. From there, I started delving deeper into the history of the community, of the Indian history in particular. And there was this project that I did. It's an outdoor street theater project called Project Rupkor, which follows the story of what happened to the women during the partition period. Now, a lot of people in Singapore, especially within the Indian community, don't really care about what happened in India, because to them, they're so far removed from their roots. They're so far removed from their country. But when we did this play, majority of them were Singaporeans, and they were all sitting there, and they were shocked, and found that sort of shared narrative in watching this particular play. And that was the whole point of doing it in the first place. It's that we're all connected. We all share the same stories, right? Or similar stories. Which brings me to CFAS. CFAS is the Singapore Indian Fine Arts Society, where I currently head. And, the problem about heritage, there are many problems, but the problem about heritage is how do you preserve, how do you promote, how do you make it sustainable, right? How do you grow towards the future? And at CFAS, we completely reimagined our whole ecosystem because we realized that in order for tradition to survive, you have to change. You have to revamp, you have to evolve. So for us, there are two wings. We have the CFAS Academy, which teaches, you can appreciate the artworks, you learn, you train, which then delves into the productions wing, where you get to produce, perform, and watch. Not only are you an audience member, but you're a performer as well, you're a producer as well, you're an organizer as well. And that's the so-called virtuous circle that we actually present with whatever we do, right? So speaking of communities, in order for the traditional arts to survive, we realized that it wasn't just important to produce good content out there. We had a bigger responsibility. The thing about CFAS is that we're 74 years old this year. We've been around since 1949, right? We've had over 50,000 graduates, okay? We've produced over 100,000 performances. We've traveled all across the world. Till date, we have about 275 programs that we do in a year, okay? There's only 365 days, so you can imagine what I'm doing every day in CFAS, right? But we realized that the responsibility of an Indian traditional arts organization was far greater than just about the arts. It was about bringing communities together. It was about bringing an umbrella and having that sort of, being a champion in a way for heritage, right? To grow, for people to understand where we come from, what we do, what we love, what we like to enjoy. So this is just a breakdown of some of the things, people that we work with, right, that are part of us. We have our alumni, we have our volunteers, we have our arts industry partners that we collaborate with, we work with educational institutions, we work with different ethnic community groups. There are over 100 Indian ethnic community groups in Singapore, okay, and each of them has their own organization, all right, so you can imagine how many emails I have to send if I have a program. Okay, we work with government organizations. We have to partner with them. Obviously, that's where the money is. Media partners are very important because they help us disseminate information. We work with community organizations, people's associations, high commissioners, and then we have international partners as well. So this is pretty much our stakeholders, I would say, right? And that's pretty much what that's how we survive. That's how we can sustain ourselves, by bringing these people together and spreading the arts in that way. And I don't know how many minutes I have left, but just to go very quickly, we talk about presenting a very diverse platform. How do you make traditional arts exciting? How do you make it, enjoyable for everyone? How do you get your own people in the Indian community to come and actually watch traditional arts? Because when they see a Carnatic music presentation or a Hindustani music presentation, a lot of them would just be like, what the hell is this? I don't understand. But the moment they see a Chinese guy on a tabla, suddenly it becomes of interest. Suddenly they pay attention. Okay? It's a very funny thing, So we started jumping on that bandwagon. We got students who were Chinese, we got students who were Malay. In fact, if you see this picture over here, we have Tony Macrom, who is a professor in NUS for music, who is a mridangam player. And he's pretty much a professional right now, having studied in CFAS. To the left, you have the head of Nadi Singapura, who also learned mridangam and brought his Malay music and drums into Indian music as well. So constantly there's a learning that's happening within the community, inter and intra as well, right? We've got alumni that we are constantly working with. Now, they're all full-fledged professionals in their own way, but they come back, they give back to the society in whatever way they can. We have volunteers who are very dedicated, who love taking pictures in saris and stuff, but you know what? Why not? We need the help, okay? When we talk about diversity, right, we work with all the different ethnic community groups. We present programs with them. They share their culture with us through a series called Unity in Diversity. Another example of what we do is, partnerships in the arts industry. We are partners with Esplanade now for the last 15 years. So we're constantly performing in their spaces. And that's great because they reach out to a different audience that we might never be able to. And that's one of the goals as well in, promoting heritage and growing that in some way. We've also collaborated with LaSalle, we've collaborated with UWC, we've collaborated with NUS, doing lots of programs here and there, right? And the goal to reach out to a wider audience, to our media partners, working with People's Association, performing in Chingay, performing in festivals, national festivals. You know, the point about serving the community too, we're not just reaching out to youths, but also the seniors, youths at risk. We work with CINDA quite closely as well. So there's constantly, you know, some kind of exploration going on so that we can actually build a community and spread the word and get people interested. We've done, you know, digital productions. We've collaborated with different museums, including Indian Heritage Center, Malay Heritage Center as well. Even working with international partners, you know, because the thing about arts is that it's quite political, and so is heritage. And these are the people that actually dictate the kinds of things that money can be used for. So it just bodes well for us to actually be in collaboration with them, to work closely with them, right? And of course,